So this is pretty wild. This is actually a company called Primitive. They can take an application and model it in 3D virtual reality space. So what you're looking at here is the entirety of Mago. You see some of these areas go quite deep in terms of some of the stuff that's inside of them. Really basic. There's a lot of stuff in this models thing here. We can actually look at these models are actually the things that control a lot of the data in the application, kind of defining structures and things like that. So some of these things aren't necessarily very interesting, but then there's a lot of interesting things that happen in the code as well. There's not a whole lot going into these things. These are just tracking. These are just ways of storing and organizing the data. So if I kind of circle this, you can see what's really going on there. But what's really interesting is some of these other pieces, like right over here, Mago. This itself is the web application. So this is where the web stuff lives. So we have these things here, controllers. These actually handle various things for the requests you make. Whenever you make a request to get a page or to do any certain thing, these methods actually, all these controllers here actually handle that effort. So like the book controller, for example, if I open that up, it's got a couple different options, both for pulling an event up, and then when somebody submits, when they're booking online, when they submit their information, right here is handling a lot of these options. So all these controllers really do is kind of handle requests. They don't do very much other than handle the requests and send things back and forth. But I'm going to come out of that because a lot of the real work that actually happens over here in this common package. And this package controls a lot of the business logic. And you can see how this gets shared with the MailBot, which is the application that runs in the background and pulls your inbox to bring mail and automatically integrate into Mago. You have the automation engine, which does a lot of the automation that happens in the background. All of these kind of link over to this common module. So all of the business logic, all of the logic really lives in these services. So if we're getting something in and out of cache, for example, we can see that we have some methods that get a cache string or set a cache string and kind of abstract that. So we get our instance and we lazy load a instance of the cache itself. The automation engine is actually a really interesting piece that we do a lot with. This is a pretty complex piece, but the kind of core of it is we define all these different actions. So every single one of these is an action that does something. And so these are all the different automation actions that get defined right now. So when you go in and create an automation request, there's a request processor that handles a lot of this. So if I just kind of zoom into this, you can see that there's the request processor and there's this execute method that does a lot of the effort. There's a request processor that goes and handles the request, and then there's an automation runner as well that actually handles these automation requests. So this right here is what's actually processing the automation request and goes and puts all the steps together and runs them or schedules them, and you can see where these things where this actually gets called from. You can see where the requests come from, so you can see what's lining up over here. If I do that again, you can see that from the controller, it calls that execute request. So when you go to the web page and run an automation, it calls this execution request here. And if we jump out, what's really interesting is this action factory. This is what's creating these. This is what's creating different actions and kind of initializes them with the information about the automation that you're running, and all of these are defined here. So if we look at a really simple one that's just doing something like adding a tag, if I open that up, you can see that there's two different what we call constructors, depending on how we're loading it, whether we're creating a new task or we're running a task, and we get information in here. And then every one of these actions has a couple steps. It has prepare action where it goes and constructs the action record, and then there's an action that executes. So this is going and determining, okay, if this is a contact, we're going to create the tag this way. If it's a gig, we're going to throw the task. We're going to create the tag on a gig. And if we're And we can also, you can see there's all the plumbing in place now to start being able to tag prospects and things like that. So right now there's a placeholder. So as soon as we add the rest of the prospect capabilities in here, then we can just plug that code right in there, and it'll start to do the things that it does. And so we parse the tags out, but this is really kind of fundamentally how the automation engine works. And there's a couple other interesting pieces that go on in here. This here is actually handling all your contact form requests. It's in its own kind of isolated place, so that any issues in the main web app won't affect your contact forms. We try to keep that high availability. So we actually load balance the contact forms as well. So if there are any issues, that contact form, that process always works. This is a pretty simple thing. There's actually not a lot of code going on in here, but this is actually processing all the inbound email. So if we zoom out just a little bit, you can see this is the entirety of the Mago application, and there's a lot of different things in there. There's a lot of different pieces in there, and it's kind of cool to be able to show it off like this. So thank you to everybody at Primitive.